Due to the lack of VR news this week, outside of the new Vive Flow announcement of course, I want to take a fairly objective look at what Facebook and specifically Oculus does with your data when you buy and use an Oculus VR headset, especially considering Facebook is planning on hiring 10,000 people just to work on the metaverse, and the fact that Oculus Connect is next week, which means we are probably getting a new Oculus headset and possibly one with eye tracking and face tracking, which brings up a ton of privacy concerns. But first, this video is sponsored by Live and FitXR. FitXR is the best fitness app available for Quest. I absolutely love using this app to stay in shape. It gives you specially designed classes or sessions every single day where you burn calories by punching and moving to the music. I made a fitness video a while back where I looked at every fitness related app on Quest, and this one by far was my favorite. While you can't exactly build muscles without resistance, FitXR is the perfect fun experience to lose weight and to improve your cardio. And right now they're giving away an Oculus Quest 2 along with several other fitness goodies to jumpstart your VR fitness experience. Enter at the link below to win a Cuspo heart rate monitor, 6-month membership with Pulsoid, FitXR fitness bundle that includes a t-shirt, a cooling towel, weighted wristbands to improve your workout, a 1-year membership to FitXR, an Antlion mod mic, the same mic I use for streaming by the way, various Oculus Quest game keys, and of course the Oculus Quest 2. Check it out in the link in the description below until the end of October 25th. Alright, so first off, we need to take a look at what data Facebook actually collects when you use an Oculus headset. If you look at the Oculus privacy policy, which seems like the best place to get this information, Oculus says that they process and collect the following types of data: physical features such as your hand size or height, for example; content, meaning content you create like your avatar, pictures you post, etc. And they also collect metadata about that content, such as the date and time you created it; cookies and similar technologies, which if you're not familiar with it, it's just small packets of data that websites and apps collect to recognize if you've been there before and what you've done, like for example what kind of stuff you put in the shopping cart; interactions, or simply put, anytime you interact with an Oculus product such as the browser, voice services, or whatever else. They collect information about how you interacted with that service. So for example, when using the Oculus browser, they check how you interacted with recommended pages, what features you used, crash reporting data, and other statistics related to you using that service. Environmental, dimensional, and movement data. This is the information Oculus needs for their Guardian and tracking system to work. So for example, they have information about the play area you defined, and they collect information on how you move within that area. Information from third parties. This is just information from like third-party apps, developers, etc. So for example, if you get an achievement in a game, that information is sent to Oculus so that they can share that achievement with your Oculus friends. And then lastly, technical system information, or in other words, stuff like your IP address, device ID, amount of time it takes for things to load, and what features you actually use. Now this all sounds like a lot of data, but it is all relevant to how you use the headset. So for example, they track your location information because certain apps like Supernatural aren't available around the world. So they track your location using your IP address to make sure you're accessing apps available in your country. This can be circumvented by using a VPN, by the way, which I highly recommend. Now you may have noticed this isn't exactly an exact list of every single data piece that they collect, but it's more a generalized list just to give you an idea of the stuff that they can collect and process. And when they say process and collect, that could mean that they only use the data for processing on the headset or in some Facebook servers. You know, they don't store it, just process. Or it could mean that they actually collect it and store it in a database somewhere. To figure out what data is actually being sent to a database and not just processed, Mozilla Firefox, the browser company, did some tests and found out that although their privacy policy allows them to collect a lot of data about you, such as tracking movement and eventually presumably eye and face tracking data, fortunately at the moment they don't seem to actually be collecting that data. The data they do collect and send to Facebook servers are related to timing, application versions, and other configuration and telemetry data. And much of that data is tied to the headset itself, not the actual Facebook account. So in other words, while they could collect more data just based on their privacy policy, they seem to be pretty conservative in the data they're actually collecting and storing while you are using the device, just based on, Mozilla's findings. All of that said, another Quest developer said that the requests made to the device are encrypted, so it's actually impossible to know the exact specific data they're collecting, and anybody claiming to actually know that is lying. Pretty bold claim. So basically they're suggesting that Mozilla's lying or doesn't know what they're talking about. But I don't know, on one hand they could be right, on the other hand, even if it is encrypted and you can't see exactly what the data is being sent, you can still see how much data is being sent. And so based off that, Mozilla's conclusions aren't that far-fetched. And even if they are collecting more data than Mozilla suggests, they have made it clear that there is certain data they absolutely 100% are not going to collect. So for example, they do not collect your pass-through camera feed. While positional information and performance metrics are tracked, No raw images are stored anywhere, and any 3D maps that allow your headset to recognize your Guardian space are only stored on the actual headset, and even then it's not a raw image, but a 3D map for tracking your play space. In other words, Facebook has no way of peeping through your cameras at what you're doing or what your house looks like. And presumably this is also true for the mic, where they do have data about how they use your voice services, but they probably aren't storing raw recordings of your microphone outside of when you use it for voice commands. It does sound like they do record voice commands and they keep that, but I'll talk about that more in a second. Also, Facebook in general has been fairly transparent in the past about the data that they do collect and how they use it. I mean, Facebook even lets you look at the data they have on you so that you can manage it. I mean, most people that are crazy about hating Facebook just ignore this fact. You can literally download a copy of all of the data that Facebook or Instagram has on you. It's only a matter of time until you'll probably be able to do the same thing with your Oculus data. At the very least, they've made it clear that they'll tell you what data they're tracking, even if it isn't super specific. And so when eye and face tracking become a reality, we'll be able to know what data is being processed and what data they keep. Presumably, we'll be able to find out if it's like the pass-through cameras where they process all the data on the device, or we'll be able to know if any of it's actually being sent to Facebook servers. So now knowing what data they collect, what are they actually doing with that data? Again, we can look at the privacy policy to get an idea of what they're doing with it. First, they obviously use this data specifically in regards to Oculus products to power social features and to offer and improve their XR features. So for example, they can connect you with friends you recently interacted with in an experience because of the data they collect. Another example is they analyze voice commands in order to improve their voice services. Like I said before, it actually sounds like they record the voice commands that you send to Facebook when you use their voice commands, and they put it through human and machine processes to improve their speech recognition system. So if you simply don't like that, just don't use their voice services. But if you do use it, they say that that and most of the other data is only used to improve the services. Second, the privacy policy talks about how they use the data in conjunction with other Facebook services. So here, I'm just going to read directly from the privacy policy, which states, "We use information we collect when you use Oculus products to provide, personalize, and improve Facebook products, including seamless integration between the Facebook products, to provide measurement, analytics, and other business services, including ads, to promote safety, integrity, and security, to communicate with you, and to research and innovate for the social good," whatever the hell that means. So this is pretty vague, but essentially it's saying that they just want to seamlessly integrate your data between Facebook services so that they can analyze all of that data to improve their core services and provide better products. This is ultimately why they require a Facebook login, so that they can connect your data across all of their services into one singular profile. In doing so, they can analyze your data, create a profile of who they think you are, and then provide better services to you. And one major way they do that is in advertising. They are an advertising company, and they use the information they have about you so that they can serve you better ads that are more relevant to you. From what I can tell, however, the only data that they use of mine that translates directly into advertisements is just the simple fact that I'm interested in VR. So I'll often get on Facebook and get ads about VR products, but this could also just be because I'm in a lot of VR related Facebook groups. I click on a lot of VR related articles and ads and other things, so it's hard to tell if they're inferring this about me from the fact that I have an Oculus account or from my other VR related interactions on Facebook. But I will say this, I have been served ads trying to convince me to buy an Oculus Quest. Despite already owning both a Quest 1 and a Quest 2, which I'm sure Oculus knows, they still tried to sell me an Oculus Quest 2. So there does seem to be some sort of disconnect between Oculus's data and Facebook's data, and I'm actually questioning how much Oculus data is being stored and actually connected to my Facebook profile for advertising purposes, if any for that matter. I especially wonder that considering what Mozilla found, because they don't think that Facebook is actually collecting that much data when you use your headset in the first place. I mean, the data they were collecting was tied to the headset itself and not the actual Facebook account. This disconnect would explain why I'm getting Oculus Quest 2 ads after spending several hours destroying noobs in Population 1. Now, as I said before, Mozilla could be wrong, and even if they're not, Oculus could start collecting much more data without notice just based on what's already in their privacy policy. But as it stands now, it doesn't seem like they're actually using the Oculus data that we give them for advertising purposes, especially considering that they're more interested in stuff like the websites you visit and general demographic information, which is already readily available if you use Facebook. That said, if they did want to learn more about you from your VR related data, it is believed that there is a lot of information about you that can be learned just from tracking your VR movements. So for example, there's an article suggesting data scientists can infer a lot about you and your current state based on the way you hold your phone. So they can infer information about your location, activities, health condition, emotional state, etc. Presumably, similar tactics could be used to figure out a lot about us based on how we use a VR headset, especially with the addition of eye tracking and mouth tracking. All of that would be very valuable for advertising advertisers if they were to invest the time and technology to analyze that data accordingly. All of this brings up a variety of concerns from people, and rightfully so, but I also see a lot of wild speculation that just happens to not be true. One major concern is in how Facebook profits from your data. A lot of people seem to believe that the Oculus Quest 2 costs much more to manufacture than they sell it for, and so they assume that Facebook is subsidizing Quest sales with the value they gain from your data. Or in other words, they don't make money selling you a Quest for $300, they make money from you using the Quest and collecting that data. So first off, I couldn't find any exact data regarding how much it costs to actually manufacture the Oculus Quest 2. The closest thing I could find was a teardown of the Oculus Rift DK1, which put the price tag of the entire device at about $200 US. And the Oculus Quest 2 has an XR2 processor, which would add about $150 to the final price tag, but also it has a cheaper, lens, the screen, and so there's a whole lot of factors. Altogether, it's really hard to estimate the exact manufacturing cost, but taking into consideration the economies of scale and all of the corners they cut on the Quest 2, it is possible that they're making a very slim profit margin on each Quest. That said, that would only be taking into consideration the manufacturing costs and not the cost for research and development. And so, in fact, it pretty is undoubtedly true that they probably are selling the headset at a loss. At the very least, they could be making a slim profit margin, but it's more likely that they're making a loss. Several people have suggested, based on the fact that a business headset costs $400 more, that they are in fact subsidizing the headset with your data, and that $400 difference is the price of your data. Now, this is an objectively ridiculous contention. As it stands now, Oculus does not make hardly any money from your personal data unless you use other Facebook services such as Facebook or Instagram. And even then, like I said before, it doesn't appear Facebook ads are even using the data from Oculus gaming sessions. But for the sake of argument, let's assume that Oculus is collecting data about you and sending it to Facebook to make money through advertising. Essentially, the only way Facebook would be able to make money on your data is by advertising to you. And as it stands right now, there are no ads in VR. So if you only use Oculus services and never get on Facebook or Instagram, then theoretically, Oculus is just losing money on you if each headset is sold at a loss with hopes of making up the difference in advertising revenue, which again, you'd have to be using Facebook or Instagram for that to even work. Now, to be clear, there are ads of other games within the Oculus store, so technically Oculus earns a little money from game developers who wish to advertise their games on the store, and they do use your data to make sure they show you the games that are relevant to you. But any actual profits from this is presumably negligible compared to the revenue that they make if you happen to use Facebook or Instagram. All that said, they aren't actually making any more money from you when you use Oculus than they were before you use Oculus, assuming your Facebook and Instagram habits haven't changed. All things being equal, Facebook can only serve you a limited number of ads, and so even if they did use your Oculus data to serve you more relevant ads on Facebook, they aren't making more money from this. They'd be making the same amount of money, and so it just doesn't make sense for them to invest the time and effort into analyzing your Oculus data if the end goal, if the end product is still the same number of ads when you get on Facebook. The fact that you use an Oculus or not does not change the number of ads that you will see when you're scrolling through Facebook or Instagram, and thus it doesn't affect Facebook's bottom line. With all that in consideration, the main concern then becomes the idea that Facebook will in the future use your data to fill VR with ads. The idea is essentially that they're hooking a bunch of people onto their platform now so that in the future, when they do start serving ads in VR directly through Oculus services and games, they'll have a big enough player base to make a profit on ads, and you won't be able to switch to a competitor because you'll be integrated into their services already. Now, Oculus did in fact start testing ads in VR, and based on the massive backlash, they ended up canceling those tests, and this spurred a massive debate over whether or not ads in VR are good or not. And frankly, that discussion deserves an entire video simply for that topic. But for the sake of this video, and I'm inserting my opinion here, so take this with a massive grain of salt, but suffice it to say that it's highly unlikely that they're subsidizing the Quest 2 now with hopes of making more profits in the future on ads. It's much more likely that their plan was to subsidize it on software sales, or in other words, by selling you games and apps. Anytime you buy a game or app, Oculus gets a 30% cut, and I've personally spent much more on games than I ever did on the original $300 headset. There is a ton of money to be made by getting a headset into the hands of as many people as possible, and then profiting from the continual software sales that continue to happen months or even years after the initial sale of the device, especially when they're the biggest player in the VR market. They're playing the long game here. This is exactly what PlayStation and Xbox do, and so it just makes sense for Oculus to pursue a similar strategy. This isn't to say that they aren't wanting to put ads in VR just, as an extra form of revenue, but to say that they're subsidizing the headset with your data is a gross overstatement of the facts. Currently, if anything, it is subsidized on game sales, and if they do advertise in the future, it would just be a small penny addition to their profits, not the main form of revenue. They would need a lot of ads for those profits to outweigh the game sales. And developers would never allow allow that in their games, because at that point they'd be ostracizing consumers and ultimately hurting developers' bottom lines with less user and less game sales if they were to put too many ads in VR. And even if they were to start serving tons of ads in VR, it is pretty likely that they'd be using mainly your Facebook data to serve you ads and not so much your Oculus data as many people believe. This is simply because your Facebook data is more readily available and more, valuable to advertisers when they define their target audience. Sure, as I said before, it might be possible to infer a lot of information about you based on how you move your arms when you play VR, or they could just go to your Facebook profile to see what you're interested in and serve ads that way. Sure, eye tracking would be useful to see how well ads are performing, for example, tracking how long you look at an ad or if you looked at all, and just knowing what games you're interested in would be useful for advertising as well. But ultimately, the data gathered from Facebook and Instagram is a much cheaper and more effective way of figuring out who you are and what kind of stuff you'd be interested in. Now, I just want to point out that I know at least one bozo is going to come in here saying that I'm wrong. Of course, Facebook makes a ton of money on ads. You just have to look at their public reporting, which states that a huge percent of their revenue comes from advertising. And to that, I'd say, no shit, Sherlock. Facebook, the social media giant, makes tons of money from advertising, but Oculus, the small subsidiary, Facebook Reality Labs that we're talking about, has a very different income statement than the entire Facebook conglomerate. Not that we can look at it, but if you have more than 2 brain cells, you know that there's a difference between Facebook's income statements and the revenue of a single subsidiary, Oculus, makes from you buying and using Oculus products. Another concern regarding how Facebook profits from your data is in regards to them selling your data to advertisers or anybody else. This is a very common misconception that simply isn't true. Facebook explicitly states that they don't sell your data to anybody. Simply put, when a data wants to advertise something on Facebook or Google or any other advertising platform, they'll simply tell Facebook who their target audience is, and then Facebook takes that ad and presents it to that target audience based on the data that Facebook has stored on all of us. So for example, here's my Virtual Panda Facebook page where I can boost a post or set up an advertisement. Here I can actually select what audience I'm targeting, and I can target people based on similar websites they visited, as well as their age, location, interests, and other demographics. The sky's the limit. I can get pretty specific here, but all the while, I don't actually see your data or anyone else's data. I just created an audience profile, and then Facebook does the rest. They aren't selling your data to anybody. They just use it to serve you more relevant ads on Instagram or Facebook. That's it. Now, there is general concern that they could have another data leak. Facebook recently had one. They've had some in the past, and giving other companies to your data would be a big concern if they had a leak. And there's also some concerns of government subpoenas where the government may have access to that data for their own nefarious purposes. These are all very real and valid concerns that warrant their own video. But ultimately, even if Facebook only wants to use your data to improve their services, it is always possible that the data they collect could end up in the wrong hands. And this is why it is very important that companies only collect data necessary to make their services run. This is why many people prefer Steam, because while Steam does collect similar data, it isn't tied to your personal data or actual name. You don't actually have to use your real name to sign up for Steam, just a valid email. This provides a layer of protection and security to you if your data ever got leaked on that platform. And this is ultimately why so many people got upset over Oculus requiring a Facebook login, because it's essentially got rid of this security option of keeping your data anonymous. Thankfully though, as stated before, Oculus seems to be generally conservative in what data they collect, but it is still a concern. So in conclusion, Facebook isn't making hardly any money off of your Oculus data. They do have the option to collect a lot of data, but all of it is relevant to you and how you use their services, and very little of it seems to actually get sent over to Facebook servers. And it just makes sense for them to keep that data simply to improve their services, because they aren't collecting irrelevant data, such as your camera pass-through feed. And if you never use Facebook or Instagram, none of your Oculus data is used for advertising. It simply isn't true that Facebook is getting rich or will get rich with your data when you use only Oculus products. Instead, they'll get rich by commanding a huge market share in VR and then having you buy games on the Oculus store. Not from your data, just from game sales. So hopefully this video helped you to understand better how Oculus uses your data so that you can make an informed decision for yourself on whether or not you want to start using or continue to use their products. Don't listen to the fear-mongering mob that simply likes to chant, "Facebook bad, Facebook bad." Instead, look objectively at what Facebook is actually doing with your data and decide if you're okay with that or not. And if you do decide that you want to use your headset without a Facebook account, you can actually now do that by downloading Oculus to disconnect Facebook from the device. This loses access to all of your Facebook services and official apps at the same time, so it's not a great option, but it's there. And by the way, I'm not paid by Facebook, I'm not an Oculus ambassador, and I've had zero contact with any Facebook representatives. I used to be on the hate Facebook bandwagon too until I looked at it objectively and came to some of the conclusions presented in this video. And while I still have plenty of qualms with Facebook in general, I really don't care that good old Zuck knows how often I look up furry. Sorry, that clip cut off. I was going to say furry pictures of pandas because they're just so gosh darn cute.